It's the Lily Factor! Ding! Okay, so today I'm going to go over the reputable Chameleon Markers, which are alcohol-based markers that can make sort of a gradient using an extra piece on the marker that can make one color become lighter and then fade into becoming darker. So you can see on the left there, those were two samples of the marker's ability to create that sort of gradient. And it's a little hard to just explain verbally, so in a bit I'll be able to show you all how exactly I'm able to make that gradient with these markers. But in the meantime, I'm sketching out an example character of just what exactly these chameleon markers can do. I've seen a lot of reviews done for the chameleon markers, and I feel like some people aren't giving them the credit they deserve. While these markers are mainly known for their ability to make that kind of gradient, there's also a lot of things that chameleon markers are capable of that people aren't really mentioning, which I will really dive into discussion throughout this video. First things first is there are a lot of great things that come in this package, one of which is this outliner, and for all the chameleon markers, none of the caps go on top of each other. I know that's a pet peeve for some people, but it doesn't really bother me. But I love this outliner. I've used it for a long time, since I've gotten this package of markers, which was in May. So I've used this outliner mainly for sketching. I don't typically outline any of my illustrations in just black. I really like a lot of colors, and black outlines for me just kind of make my color scheme look bland. So it's not really something I'm into or that I do for my style. But like I said, I want to maintain using everything that came in the package, which includes this outliner. So I just went with using it to outline the entire thing. Along with the package came a large set of multiple colors and a colorless blender. I'll talk about that blender in a moment, but now I'm going to show here is how you cause that gradient with the color. You take a cap off a certain piece of the marker, you see that white tip there, and you set it above the other tip of the marker for 10 seconds or however long you want to do it, and it'll cause that gradient. I guess it just kind of whites out the marker and it causes it to make the color lighter. So yeah, it's really impressive. And now you can see I'm using that colorless blender, which is that white marker. I've never used a colorless blender before, but I gotta say, this one, I really like it. Colorless blenders mainly just kind of lighten up colors. They don't really blend the marker per se, because they're just kind of lightening those harsher lines and colors. But I really like the colorless blender. I feel like it makes me use less ink from my other markers to blend, which is a nice advantage. And of course, that gradient you can make with the chameleon markers also makes you use less ink and makes it easier to blend colors, because you can see I was able to make this sort of light to dark gradient with this Christmas themed character's Christmas tree colored hair. And so it was really nice to do that. I've seen a lot of people do reviews on making that gradient, and they say, they have a lot of streaking issues, which, yeah, it is kind of an issue. But if you just grab that colorless blender and really, dig into there, it's not that bad. I guess it just depends on what you're trying to color. But for me, as a rendered colorful kind of style, I really don't have an issue with that gradient that can tend to be a little streaky. As I mentioned before, these are alcohol-based markers, so the streakiness isn't that common. It's really just for the gradient, because the color can fade so fast back to its original color, it'll come across streaky. But these are alcohol-based markers, meaning they'll be able to blend and have those flat colors very easily, which is a huge advantage when you're looking for, say, a Copic marker alternative, which Copic markers are like the most expensive king of the marker universe, I guess is the best way to put it. And I've been a strict Copic marker user. I've never really touched any other kind of alcohol-based markers except for chameleon markers, which I gotta say, people have not labeled these as Copic alternatives, but they really are. They blend very well. And they're just, you know, they have different qualities from Copics, but none of which are that different that would make them seem less cool next to Copics. Really, if you look at price comparison, Chameleon Markers are probably still very expensive compared to many alcohol-based markers that are alternatives for Copic markers, but they're probably just the highest alternative marker for alcohol-based markers, but they're still slightly cheaper than Copic markers, and they have that advantage of being able to make those cool gradients, which can just make coloring a lot of fun. So I think people haven't really made that clear enough that these blend really well. They work very similar to Copics. There's not much of a difference except for maybe the brush nibs. They have, for the Chameleon markers, there are bullet nibs and brush nibs, whereas Copic markers will have, you know, chisel nibs and brush nibs, which I'm not really going to get into that, especially if no one really understands what I'm talking about. But basically, the only thing with the Chameleon markers that I noticed was slightly an issue was the fact that the brush nibs kind of get a little, they just kind of break apart. But in this package also came a really large collection of replaceable nibs, which I thought was very generous. So it actually isn't that bad, because if it gets to the point where these nibs break and such, I can always just replace them with the free thing that came in the package, as well as the fact that, yeah, they do get a little broken into pieces and such, but they actually are still usable even with these messy nibs, so I haven't had a need to replace them at all. So you can see so far in this illustration here, I've been able to I actually used every single color that came in the package on this one character. That included the outliner and the colorless blender, so I used the entire package. I really wanted to showcase all the colors and everything that you could blend and mix together. They really act as great alcohol-based markers, and I think truly these are alternatives for Copic markers and really a lot of markers out there. One last thing I noticed in comparison from these markers to the other markers I've been blabbering on about in this video so far is Chameleon markers aren't very buildable. So if I go back on top of one color with the same color with Copic markers, it will be darker. But of course it'll blend, so it's not like, you know, obvious darker. Whereas with Chameleon markers, I have to go over it a lot before that one color looks slightly darker. And another thing is, when you set them down at first, they look like really harsh and dark colors, and then they just kind of fade, which isn't like a problem to me in any way. It doesn't bother me. It's just something I noticed. But to be honest, that was literally everything I could possibly nitpick about these markers. They are really great markers. I had to really search to find things that potentially might bother people about them. I just felt like I needed to voice my opinion of these markers, because I've been looking at reviews, and I just feel like people have different opinions of these markers than I do. With that being said, I'll now dive into the drawings that I've been doing. So this first one was kind of a holiday themed character because it's December, so, you know, gotta draw more holiday characters, right? So her hair is like, I guess, kind of a Christmas tree color, and her skin kind of matches the stump of the tree. And then I wanted to do, like, you know, kind of the Polar Express, you know, the bells, reindeer bells on that little red ribbon strap thing, but except, like, tie it around her hair. It was fun. Very mismatched pattern. That skirt was supposed to be, like, buffalo check, and I don't think it really turned out that way, but you see I'm already moving on, so speed it up, Lily. But we are now at my next drawing, which is of a dude. His original design, while I was sketching him out, I was like, oh, you know, let's have him holding, you know, one of those big toy bags of Santa Claus. But, you know, he could also be taking out the trash and just have a really nice bright red trash bag. So, you know, you can decide what you want to think that is. But anyway, I kind of stylized his hair. I was gonna make it colored like the Northern Lights to go along with the Christmas theme, but you'll see once I get to coloring, it does not turn out anything like the Northern Lights, so beware. When I had drawn the female character skirt, I was heavily inspired by like drawing those kind of patterns that I typically don't draw in general, especially not with markers. So I was really aiming to challenge myself there. So I kind of designed his pants around that theme of maybe doing something with plaid or I don't know, something. I also have a battle with those feet down there because I started to kind of erase, the pencil stuff to go over it with markers, but then I was like, wait a minute, I did not add enough details on the hands or the feet to outline anything because otherwise it would just be really weird. I am not very comfortable with outlining in black. I just feel like there's too many mistakes that are very clear to see, Another thing came to mind about Chameleon markers that's different from Copics is, and really for a lot of markers, you know how the marker caps are kind of deceiving because you look at it and you're like, oh, okay, well this color is clearly black, and you set it down and it's like this purple and you're like, what? Not because you're colorblind, just because, the caps are misleading. So Copic markers kind of have like really, sometimes like they're pretty close to the actual color of the marker tip on the cap, and then other times it is nothing like the actual color inside the marker. So for Chameleon, they're actually pretty spot on, except they're just slightly more saturated than the actual color, especially that gray. I use that gray a lot throughout both illustrations. I used Chameleon markers, and the gray just, it was labeled like it would be really dark, and it wasn't. So it was really hard to kind of add shadows and stuff like I wanted to do with the gray because it just wasn't even visible. Now you can see I'm trying to do the Northern Lights hair, and it's like Easter threw up on his head or something. So I kind of have a 2-hour battle with that. No, I'm just kidding. I also was gonna do like the skin blue or something. I don't know what I was thinking. It was kind of giving me too many flashbacks of like billions of characters that look like that. So I kind of just decided to go over it with a skin tone, but actually created a nice little shading, the blue mixed with the skin tone. But I was looking at that hair and I'm like, I need to go darker. So you'll see in just a moment I get really daring and I like go over it with this dark blue and this dark purple and this dark purplish pink, and then I blend it out with a colorless blender and it got better. Oh, and a dark green. I'll probably be back with that gray. Wow, alliteration. I also decided to use the whole gradient ability that Chameleon markers have on his puffer jacket, and I kind of just will like blend it out and then add some darker shadows once the color is no longer light from that weird white marker tip that I can't describe. And then I'll go on top of it with that disappointing gray. I just got it. Its name. That's what it's called. Disappointing gray. Very disappointing. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back to the pet artist pens when I'm using grays because I've yet to meet a single gray that has done me justice except for those other markers. But moving on. So I keep going over with the gray, and the colors weren't really building because I wanted to add like those kind of shadows that like a puffer jacket has, where it's that stitching and it kind of creates this sort of shadow in between like the fabrics that are all stitched together. And gosh, this is hard to describe without like moving my hands around and jumping and doing all these motions to help you visualize. But anyway, so yeah, I'm just blending it all out. And I feel like I just got better the longer I used them, but boy, it takes some time to get it just right when it comes to those colors. I can say though, those whole gradient things, it really makes it look like I can do lighting. Like you can see there's kind of some sort of light something hitting him. And then with the leftover purple, just makes it look like he's got some weird purple light, bouncing off his jacket or something. So it's really good, and I'm not even trying to make lighting, but if I was, these markers can definitely pull that off. You can see now too, I'm coloring a big area of just one color. And you can see that red doesn't really streak that badly. I mean, I know I tried that whole gradient thing, tried to blend it out, and that was just not even necessary. I shouldn't have thought that lighting would go on that bag there. But anyway, it doesn't really streak, and certain lighting makes it look like it's streaky, but you'll see it kind of dries and doesn't appear that streaky anymore. Oh, those orange gloves were fun. I don't know why those hands, I just, when I drew them, I was like, I didn't even need a reference this time. Like, you know, it was kind of one of those moments where I'm like, wow, how'd that come out? So yeah, I was pretty pleased with that. Oh, and the skin was a little too pale for my liking, so I had to go back and add some darker shadows and sort of blend that out. I always go back and darken things up, don't I? Yeah, I do. I'm like watching myself just go back and like, darker, darker. Oh, I also colored the pants this green, and I wasn't gonna keep it that green. Yeah, you're welcome. Everybody, you're welcome. But I wasn't gonna keep it that green. I was gonna see if I could like blend a color with it and make it like a different color. And I tried to use like this yellowish brown, and it just, ugh. So I just used that disappointing gray, and I went on top of the green to kind of darken it up and make it less saturated, which worked. But you can see, like, look, I keep going over with that same disappointing gray, and it barely made a shadow. So that was a little annoying, but I mean, if I didn't restrict myself to only using Chameleon art supplies, I think I could have gotten different shadows. So, you know, no big deal. No big deal. They're still great markers. I would recommend them. But anyway, now I'm adding that plaid design. You'll see me. Yep, there it is. White gel pen time. Booyah! So I'm like, you know, just dotting it in there, adding that plaid design, but obviously it's a little too distracting, so I go back over it with the red, because I don't want to, you know, drive people's eyes crazy or something. I mean, I don't want to be like walking with this drawing in the streets and then just flash that white gel pen pants at people and they're like, my eyes, it's so bright, you know, it needs red. I'm just envisioning that happening, and I just, oh my gosh, if that really happened, it would be the weirdest day of my life, and I've been through pretty weird days. I'm envisioning it at a dollar store for some reason, but anyway, yeah, so I'm just going right on top of that white gel pen and going dot 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 dot, and yeah, it took some time, but I love adding those little details. It's kind of just, it was this, when I was drawing the dude, like, it was just mind-numbing work, because the entire time I wasn't even thinking, like, I was just kind of singing to myself and just not even thinking normal thoughts, like, just not even speaking in full sentences kind of thing, where I was just drawing and nothing was in my way, and so I was just, you know, in the zone. Yeah, I should have just stuck with in the zone and left it there. I tried to color, like, a blue background, but I didn't want to use all that blue ink, you know? So I tried to just kind of do some cross-hatching, and it worked. It would have been better if it was all blue, I guess. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. But, of course, that page, to me, just was still a little blank, so I just did some little sketches, nothing really used with Chameleon Markers, so I'll just spend this last amount of time to talk about how I really like Chameleon Markers. I think they are perfect Copic marker alternatives. They're great alcohol-based markers if you're willing to splurge a little more money than you'd use for like other kind of alternative markers, but also not spend a whole lot of money on the Copic stuff, as well as the fact that these are very unique markers. They make those gradients, and look at all the fun colors you can make. I mean, really, they're awesome. Yeah, I saw so many reviews that people were like, you know, the gradients are streaky and stuff, and I'm like, who's talking about why these markers are, you know, like, who's giving these markers compliments? I'm like, okay, it's my turn. So, there's the whole art supply mess. I used every single one of those colors on one character, and then I used a lot, I don't even know if I used all of them on the dude, but, you know, whatever. So there's the entire page I used up. And another thing with some of the weird colors is also because I'm using a certain paper that doesn't really work for that. Sorry. Bye! Thank you for watching. Good luck in life and in art. Bye!